Greetings, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad you're here. Thanks for tuning in. Tonight, we'll continue our reading of In Miserable Slavery, the Thomas Thistlewood Diaries. We're on Chapter 9, The Establishment of Thomas Thistlewood, 1770 through 1776. Introduction. Here we have Thomas Thistlewood, Esquire, Justice of the Peace and Lieutenant of the Fort at Savannah Lamar, at the top of his fortune, and, the unusual illnesses aside, at his most comfortable. Within and beyond the parish, his horticultural interests and expertise are recognized, and his garden has become an attraction to visitors. Nonetheless, he is not resting on accomplishment. In these years, he introduces new activities, hives of bees, an indigo patch, and a trial export of annatto. With great satisfaction and an abundant hospitality, he entertains and is entertained by some of the wealthiest and most influential members of the sugar plantocracy, and they seem to regard him as a social equal, perhaps in acknowledgement of his wide interests and his outstanding horticultural achievement. Perhaps his only real disappointment lies in the behavior of his son, Mulatto John, who is not turning out to be the intellectually inclined reader of books his father seemingly hoped for, and whose veracity is occasionally questionable. He is spoiled, Thistlewood thinks, by his mother, but there is hope that he might yet prove himself in more practical pursuits. But again, life in Westmoreland was disturbed by war of American independence from 1775 to 1783, and by the threat of slave revolt spreading south from the parish of Hanover. In these years, Thomas Thistlewood established himself as a member of the landed gentry. His property in land and slaves was relatively small, and he was not among the sugar producing aristocracy. But his skills as a horticulturalist gave him prestige, and his long and continuing association with the Cope family gave him social entree. At the same time, his open and affectionate association with Phoeba and her relatives and friends apparently gave him a special consideration among some slaves and equally tempered his behavior towards them. Monday, January 23rd, 1769. That morning I rode into Savannah, called at Mr. Stone's. He says he expects to make but a short crop, shall not want to hire Negroes. Thence rode to Mr. Weech's, and from thence to 3 Mile River, where saw Mr. Carr and spoke to him in respect of running the lines between me and Mr. Kirkpatrick, which he says shall be seen about when Mr. Rankin the surveyor comes down this way. Then I rode out to Blue Castle Estate and agreed with Dr. James Wedderburn about my Negroes for the crop at 3 bits per diem. Sunday, January 29th, 1769. Wrote to James Wedderburn, Esquire, and about 4 p.m. sent my Negroes to his estate, which was Blue Castle, to work. Visiting was Lincoln, Dick, Salon, Cujo, Johnny, Caesar, Suki, Frankie, Sally, Maria, Nanny, Cuba, Myrtilla, and Peggy, for a total of 14. Sunday, February 5th, 1769. To Mr. Little for 10 pounds of beef, 8 bits, and for a bit bread at a bit. Many of my Negroes over from Blue Castle praise it much, being easy worked. Friday, February 17th, 1769. A little a little afternoon rode to Egypt and dined there, as did also Mr. Cope, Robert Baker, Mr. Samuel Lee, Dr. Gorse, Captain Benden, and Captain John White. After dinner, drank hard. I got away about 5 p.m., a good deal in liquor, but the rest sat longer and were all in for it very much. Mr. Hartnell, I hear, was quite drunk, insomuch that the boilers could get no lamp oil for the boiling house use. Mr. Cope stayed all night and sat up till midnight, but went home before day. Captain White and Captain Benden fought. I was much disordered, but got home very well and slept well at night. At dinner, Mr. Cope ordered Hartnell to let me have 4 puncheons of rum, strong proof, a cask of 30 gallons, ditto, for my own use, and a flour barrel of sugar. It seems last night little Member came by the bay to sleep with Mr. Hartnell. Give me one moment. I'm having some technical difficulties. All right, hopefully you can hear me now. I'm sorry about that. All right, on Saturday, February 25th, 1769, a play this evening at Egypt made by Daniel to throw water for this boy, Fortune, killed by Paradise Mill wheel last crop. Tuesday, February 28th, 1769, rode into the savannah to Mr. Emmetson and stayed 2 or 3 hours with him. He gave me a ball of chocolate, showed me his will, which I read over. He leaves Mary Emmetson, his Negro wench, free at his death, 100 pounds sterling to the little girl of the late Mr. Dixon's. Miss Emmetson's took 500 pounds to his niece at home, and the rest to Mrs. Underwood. Surprising. I rode home to dinner. Mr. Pommels, myself, and Mr. Underwood are executors. Wednesday, March 22nd, 1769. Egypt Lucy acquainted Fibba privately that the Mayal dance has been held twice in Fibba's Cuba's house at Paradise Estate, as also Egypt Dago and Job, who are both Mayal men, attend these dancings. Monday, March 27th, 1769, Easter Monday. Nanny's child sick. Kept her at home and gave it a dose of physic. It is feverish. Last night, John lay in my bed again and he pissed it. April brought more disastrous wedding. Heavy rains on Saturday the 1st swamped the garden and left parts of it underwater for several days. Tuesday, April the 4th, 1769, Kirkpatrick Cujo at my house to draw Fibba's teeth, but could not get at them, being stumps and so far back. So Fibba had messed up teeth. Sunday, April 9th, 1769, for 10 pounds of fresh beef, 8 bits. Very bad indeed, near Carrion. Wednesday, April 12th, 1769, little member at the pen today. Thursday, April 13th, 1769, here Mr. John Hartnell is building little member a house at Egypt. Sunday, April 16th, 1769, House Frankie and Fibba's Cuba over here today. Reprimanded Cuba severely about the Mayal affair. I wonder was he talking about the dances that they did that were obia dances? Because he seems to be upset about them doing the Mayal dances. Wednesday, April 19th, 1769, about 10 a.m., Emmetson's Mary sent me word privately by a Negro man that Mr. Emmetson is now very bad indeed. Mr. Emmetson died in the morning of Friday the 21st and was buried on the 22nd in the Anglican churchyard. And as for himself and Fibba, as a running which stains a yellowish brown still continues, also a continual headache, took a dose of physic this morning, which worked indifferently. Fibba is still frequently troubled by the toothache and is restless at nights. Her menses are coming on, but not quite as they should. Saturday, April the 29th, 1769, rode to Savannah Lamar, and at about 11 o'clock, Dr. Thomas King drew my aching tooth. It was in the upper jaw, the last but one on the right side, firmly fixed. He had 3 trials at it, and the operation was intolerably painful. However, when drawn, I was pretty easy. Fibba also walked to the bay, and he pulled out 2 stumps for her which gave her a good deal of ease. At the evening, Fibber and Vine walked home in company. My Bess and Vine Sally were with them. Monday, May 15th, 1769. Whitsun Monday. This morning sent John home as usual for the weekend to school again. Gave him a bit. Here Port Royal at Egypt died today. At night, Egypt Lucy come over to acquaint us Mr. Hartnell had put little member's chain back about his neck. Sunday, May 21st, 1769. 8 pounds of beef for 8 bits. Beef raised to 7.5 dittos a pound again lately. For bread, a bit. Served my Negroes 24 bits. This morning, flogged every field Negro I could find at home for not getting to work till 8 o'clock Monday morning. Monday, May 29th, 1769. Borrowed of Fibber, 9 pounds sterling, 15 shillings, and 0 dittos. In the evening, rode over to the wilderness to see Mr. William Palmells, drank tea and had refreshments in the dusk road home. Mr. Palmells lent me observations upon the growth and culture of vines and olives, written at the request of the Earl of Shaftesbury, to whom it is inscribed by Mr. John Locke Phoebe, first edition, 1679, London, 1766. Also, The Art of Preserving Health, a poem, a new edition, price 1 shilling 6 dittos, by John Armstrong, M.D., London, 1765. Greetings, forecast. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm so glad you're here. We had some technical difficulties early on, but we are powering through. Hopefully, I come through nice and clear. You let me know. On Monday, June 4th, 1769, all of Thistlewood's slaves, except Damsel, were back on the pen, having finished working at Blue Castle. There they found him complaining that their hogs had once again made sad havoc on the provision ground, and there were others. On Monday, June 26th, 1769, Kirkpatrick's Quasheba cow in my provision ground this morning, and had eat up a good deal of my corn, than which I never saw finer. Shot at her legs with a ball, but missed them. Tuesday, June 27th, 1769, planted all the low part of the garden with rice, four in a hole, 4 feet, rows 4 feet apart, and 3 feet in the rows. In mid-July 1769, the continuing depredations of his own and Kirkpatrick cattle notwithstanding, he went into another burst of planting in his garden: Indian kale, sunflower, Indian pinks, balsam, sage, rosemary, marjoram, and in the provision ground, callaloo and ocheros. Monday, June 17th, 1769, Dr. Wedderburn says that of those who have been long in this island, he looks upon the 4/5 die of the venereal disease, one way or other occasioned by it. Hardly a comforting remark to Mr. Thistlewood. On the 2nd of August, 1769, Thistlewood began to take the Spanish Town newspaper, which was probably the St. Iago Intelligencer, and he listed the titles of 16 books he had received from England since the beginning of the year. Most of them had arrived in February and included works in history, agriculture, and plantership, dictionaries, and other books of reference. He had also been acquiring from Mr. Hayward a number of children books, which he would soon begin to give to Mulatto John. On Monday, August the 7th, 1769, Mr. Prynold, surveyor, lent me a letter from a farmer in Pennsylvania to the inhabitants of the British colonies, Boston, 1768. On Sunday, August the 13th, 1769, Mr. Say dined with me. He says he will certainly leave Cabarita Estate in all this month, and that John Prince has left Petersfield Estate. Mr. Hartnell and Member both have the itch badly. Friday, August the 18th, 1769. Note, last night I took a mercurial pill and gave Fibber one. This morning a dose of salts and gave Fibber a dose of purging powders. Finished picking all my annatto and cut the dead branch ends off from which the annatto was picked, trimmed the trees. Sunday, August 20th, 1769, gave John, his son, the history of Jack the Giant Killer in 2 parts. On Monday, August the 21st, 1769, gave Egypt Lucy 2 bottles of porter for Daniel, who is very ill and longs for porter. On Monday, August the 27th, 1769, Mr. John Hartnell dined with me, gave him 4 mercurial pills. So they all had these venereal diseases and were trying to treat each other with these mercury pills. On Sunday, September the 3rd, 1769, returned to Fibber 27 pounds, 2 shillings, and 6 dittos, money I borrowed of her in crop time out of her own, House Frankie and Egypt Lucy's money. House Frankie at the pen today. This morning, her and Fibber walked over to Egypt. Sunday, September 24th, 1769. Last night, Kamina at Egypt christening his house. A play, supper, and other refreshments. Mr. Hartnell leaving his furniture in his piazza through carelessness. His saddlecloth, harness, and bridle were all stolen out of it. Minos and Adam watchmen, but little doll watched Adam's room. The play continues today, a pay dinner. Now, when they're talking about plays, these are another form of play intended to bestow protection on the house. Marina's housewarming, as Thistlewood then described it, on Vineyard would have been this sort. So it was a housewarming sort of play. Monday, October 2nd, 1769, betimes this morning, 14 of my Negroes, Lincoln, Dick, Cujo, Johnny, Caesar, Suki, Frankie, Myrtilla, Phoebe, Maria, Nanny, Peggy, Cuba, and Sally, set out for Cabarita Estate with 12 of Mr. Hayward's. They had gone to construct a trench from Peter's Plain and to fence off estate lines. The work could last for some weeks, and while it did, they stayed at Cabarita. Sunday, October the 7th, 1769. Last night, let Captain Charles and some of his people sleep in Lincoln's house. They called up to sell tobacco. Mr. Say and Vine disagree sadly. She is going to Roaring River tonight. Sunday, October 8th, 1769, gave John, his son, the history of Tom Long the courier. He already has Jack the Giant Killer and Tom Hickathrift. gave him a paper of ink powder. Monday, October the 9th, 1769, this afternoon, broke in my corn in the corn piece, which fell far short of my expectation. Believe Salon has stolen great part of the best. Broke in Abbas likewise, which also has suffered. He is exceedingly sly. Here old Sharper at Egypt died this morning. It doesn't say what they died of, so I wonder, were they dying of old age? Were they dying of sickness and disease? Were they dying of unknown illnesses? Were they poisoning themselves? There's no telling what they were dying of. Tuesday, November 2nd, 1769, gathered a good deal of my rice today in the garden, ripe, but parakeets, blackbirds, and others make sad havoc with it. Saturday, November 18th, 1769, about 4 p.m., our Negroes came home, having finished fencing Peter's Plain. Wrote to Mr. Hayward by Dick, Negroes labor as follows. The bill included 98 pounds, 5 shillings, and 68 for 68 and a half chains of double ditch and bank planted with penguins on Peter's Plain, and 4 pounds, 12 shillings, 6 dittos for 49 and a half days' labor on Cabarita Estate. The total amount of which is 60 pounds had already been paid in cash, was due to S. Hayward and T. Thistlewood from J. Myler. So as you can see, he was trying to make labor the cheapest. Greetings, Sister Ra, and the elders listening with you. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you for my gift. I appreciate it more than you know. He was trying to make labor the cheapest part and the supplies the more expensive part of what he was actually earning money on. Note, our Negroes have just earned us 3 bits, 2 pence, or 2 shillings and a halfpenny each per day. Having been warned the day before, Thistlewood set off in the morning of the 5th to Salt River to exercise for the first time in many months. The exercises were now regularly resumed once a week, sometimes at Salt River, sometimes in Savannah Lamar. Wednesday, December 13th, 1769, rode to Savannah Lamar. Lincoln Dick and Cujo met me in Paradise Canoe, lent me by Mr. Hartnell, to Captain James Lake for a barrel of herrings, 2 pounds, ditto of shads, 1 pound, keg of biscuit, 7 shillings, 6 dittos. Paid him and had his receipt. Open keg of bread, barrel of herrings, and ditto of shads. Served my Negroes 4 shads and 2 herrings each. On Monday, December the 25th, 1769, which was Christmas Day, served my Negroes this morning 4 herrings and 4 mackerels each. Gave Lincoln and Abba each a bottle of rum. Cujo and Johnny a bottle. Dick and Solon a bottle. Girls a bottle. Pompey, Chubb, and Caesar each a dram. In the morning, come, Fibber. Little member James over to see John. So he was back at it again, or at least the author is back to documenting his exploits once again. He seemed to have gone a very long time without noting or documenting who Thomas Thistlewood was sleeping with, but we know better. On the 26th and again on the 27th, the militia were exercised on the second occasion by a soldier, Colonel Myrie, who kept them at it until almost noon. By the year's end, his and Phoebus' infections had abated. Because of them, it had been sexually a relatively quiet year. He had kept close to Fibber, but he had also found occasion with Maria 4 times, Cuba 3, Nanny twice, Bess and Myrtilla once each, and sat with Sally twice. But on each occasion with her, it had been not good. There had also been a couple of entanglements with strangers. All had been proudly recorded, and the year ended on a note of another sort of satisfaction. So, see, the author here is being misleading because Thistlewood documented his sexual exploits, but the author did not let us track them to see whether or not he was passing this venereal disease amongst his enslaved population. Sunday, December 31st, 1769, Mr. John Hartnell breakfasted with me, rode to Savannah Lamar, thence went to Mr. Stone's and received from him a commission of the 21st instant date, which he procured for me, to be a lieutenant of Savannah Lamar Fort, paid him 10 pistoles, expenses, to the secretary, and rode to the thatch tree, and as Savannah Lamar Company, Salt River Company, and the Rangers were already under arms, called Captain Tomlinson aside and showed him my commission. So Thistlewood was very proud of this achievement. Appointed by His Excellency Sir Williams Trelawney, Bart Captain, General, and Governor in Chief, Thomas Thistlewood, gentlemen, in whom was responded, reposed confidence in your experience, courage, conduct, fidelity, and skill in military matters and affairs, was now given the responsibility and duty to exercise the inferior officers, gunners, and soldiers thereof in arms, and to hold them in good order and discipline. So Thistlewood was very proud of this appointment. On Monday, May 14th, 1770, put the following letters in Captain Richardson's bag. Of the 12th instant date, one of my brother, including a bill of lading and a scheme of the comet orbit of 1769, which he had closely observed, one to Mr. Henry Hewitt, Sr., containing a bill of lading and a list of things desired, and one to Mr. Henry Hewitt, Jr., enclosing list of things proper for the young man who intends coming out. He was, in a few months' time, to receive and give hospitality to 2 new arrivals in Jamaica until they found employment, as he had once been favored by William Durrell, and at about the same time that Henry Hewitt Jr. was writing to solicit assistance for his friends, Thistlewood was developing his local influence. Mr. Morris, Mr. Weech, Captain Blake, Captain Atkins, Mr. Chambers, Mr. Hartnell, Dr. Wedderburn dined with me, had a fine roast goose and pawpaw sauce, stewed giblets, stewed land turtle, stewed fish, a roast coot, and 2 roast plover, boiled pudding, cheese, and grog, punch, and porter. Lent Mr. Wedderburn Tull's husbandry and Cooper on distillation. A few months later, upon my asking it for him, John Hartnell was employed by Mr. Weech as overseer at Retrieve Estate. He left Egypt at the end of October with Mr. Cope still owing him £107. At Retrieve, he was to get £100 a year. Mr. Cope, Mrs. Cope, John Cunningham from Salt River, Mr. Parker, a Scotchman, late overseer at River but now employed at Egypt, and Thistlewood, all dined at Egypt on the day of Hartnell's departure. The two ex overseers and the new replacement obviously discussed the Egypt slaves. Adam and Derby run away. Big Member, Big Doll, Old Sharper, London, Kinsale, Port Royal, Morris, Violet, Mountain Susanna, and Deborah dead. Mountain Susanna had died on the 22nd of September at about noon. Other deaths noted by Thistlewood in 1770 included Dr. James Gorse, who died on May 15th at about 55 years of age, and whose burial in the new churchyard at Savannah Lamar was attended by a large gathering, including Thistlewood, Salt River's Dr. Will, who had died on a night in early June, Andrew Sims, the sugar baker, at the end of September, Vineyard Fibba sometime in September or October, and in more detail, on Friday, October 5th, here old Quashi died at Kirkpatrick before day this morning. He was very sensible and handy, also honest and trusty. He was a Coromantee Negro and brought into this island when the Duke of Portland was governor, a man boy, so consequently is between 60 and 70 years old, has for the most part been very healthy. On Saturday, December 29th, 1770, Theodore Stone, Esquire, one of the representatives of this parish, died at his house in Savannah Lamar between 10 and 11 o'clock this afternoon. A great loss to the parish in general, and Savannah Lamar in particular, as he had their interests greatly at heart. He would have been 58 the 10th of June next. It had not been a healthy year for Fibba, or indeed for Thistlewood himself or their son. On Friday, January 12th, 1770, last night I took a mercurial pill, Fibba also, as both have a running with stains and symptoms and rest excessive badly. The venereal symptoms and treatments continued on and off through the entire year, and in the middle of the year, their discomfort was increased by a violent itching which afflicted all three of them. Now, how is it that all three of them were infected with the sexually transmitted disease? Thistlewood, nonetheless, was busy supervising the development of the pen and looking for new enterprises. In January, the slaves under Cumberland's supervision were gathering and preparing materials for a goat pen. In May, he sent a small cake of annatto and a file of annatto seeds to England by Captain Atkins, whom he asked to inquire the price. On Sunday, December 2nd, Mr. Parker from Egypt, Mr. Limburger from Paradise, and Mr. Ellis from Sweet River dined with him. After dinner, they walked in his garden and perceived a swarm of bees upon a fig tree leaf. But where they should come from, God knows. On Friday, December 7th, Mr. Hayward lent me an essay on the management of bees by John Mills from London, 1766. He soon began to capture swarms of bees and to market honey. In early 1771, there became the unchallengeable evidence of his social acceptance by the large landed proprietors. Wednesday, January 16th, Vine lent me 2 tables, 4 chairs, some knives and forks, wash hand basins, tumblers, wine glasses, and sent 3 pails for drinking water quite to Salt River. On Thursday the 17th, last night, had the fat goose killed, and this morning, Cuba's barrow. Vine is so good as to assist Fibber today. Mr. and Mrs. Cope, Mr. and Mrs. Weech, Mr. John Hutt, Mr. William Blake, Mr. Chambers, and Dr. Panton dined and drank tea with me, and in the evening went home. Had goose and pawpaw sauce, roast pork and broccoli, roast whistling duck, stewed hog's head, shaddock, watermelon, oranges, Madeira wine, porter, punch, grog, and brandy. And so, with evident satisfaction, he shortly afterwards recorded on Wednesday, March 27th, 1771, this day am 50 years of age, being born March 16th, 1720 or 1721. Old style. So return thanks to the Almighty for preserving my life so long and for the many blessings I have received. Now, following the astronomical observations of Tycho Brahe, who was writing in 1546 to 1601, and others, Pope Gregory III in 1582 sponsored a reform to the calendar, which is why he writes 1720 or 1721, to compensate for an overaccumulation of days measured when the calendar year has been reckoned to a few minutes longer than the real year. 10 days were dropped from the calendar to prevent further such accumulations. Every fourth year would be a leap year, except the century years, unless the century year was divisible by 400. Thus, whereas 1760, 1764, for example, would be leap years, 1800 would not, nor would 1900, but 2000, divisible by 400, would be. The Gregorian calendar, however, was not introduced in Protestant Britain until 1752. This is why Thistlewood thought he was 50 years old in 1771, when in actuality he might have been 51 years old. The many blessings obviously excluded physical well being, although these years were to pass without serious prolonged venereal reoccurrence. There was hardly a month in which Thistlewood or Fibber or John did not suffer some indisposition or another. Even as he wrote his birthday note, they were down. Friday, March 29th, yesterday evening, Fibber took with a violent shaking cold, followed by the headache, fever pains in her belly, sides, and shoulders, with a bad cough withal. She got no rest all night, neither had I scarcely any rest. About 4 this afternoon, got Vine to take a little blood from Fibber. She remained ill through the following week. On Sunday, the 31st, her daughter Cuba and Prue, Charles, and Clara and her husband, all from Egypt, came to see her. Early in April, Dr. Panton prescribed a phial of mixture for Cuba, gave her 2 spoonfuls of it every 2 hours. Note, she got no sleep last night, nor I neither. In between the illnesses, there had been the usual rounds of entertainment and amusements, such as the races. On Wednesday, January 30th, 1771, about 3 o'clock in the morning, Fibber John Damsel, with Vine and others, set out for the race. Fibber rode Nellie, and Jimmy carried John on Mackie as far as Cabarita Estate. Gave Fibber and John 5 bits to spend. I set out from home at 8:30 on Prince's horse. He had in the meantime taken Abba, but with little success, come Abba while she was on her period in the house. Jimmy rode Mackie and got to the Newmarket course before 10 o'clock, and in about an hour the horses started. Mr. John Dawes, presto, beat Mr. Samuel Snap in the 2 heats, so consequently won. At dinner time, he and others went off to dine at Retrieve Estate with Hartnell, then back to the races, and in the evening back home. But Fibber, Vine, John, and others at the Retrieve, also with Member, but they went to Venus's house at Cabarita to sleep, only left John with James, little Member's mulatto son, at the Retrieve. Vine rode her horse, Powdertail, a great number of people at the race, and money plenty among the sportsmen, however scarce at other times. Many young sparks wore Corsican hats, wore Corsican hats, the first I have seen. The next morning, Fibber and Vine, weary of the race, came home, but not before Thistlewood himself had once again enmeshed with Abba, having sex with her in the bed, this time successfully, and then at about 7:30 a.m. he returned to the race course on his own. On Sunday, February the 17th, Mr. Parker says that Mr. Drummond, bookkeeper at Friendship, his shipmate, and about 10 days ago, having received some wages at Savannah Lamar and meeting him accidentally, would go along with him to see Egypt, and between 4 and 5 p.m. set out for home, somewhat though very little in liquor. And the footnote there says that Parker has succeeded Hartnell as overseer on Egypt. Going through the savannah, he met with a Negro wench who said she belonged to Mr. Stone and agreed to go among the bushes together, where when they had got, she desired payment first, upon which he pulled out his purse of knitted green silk, through which she easily saw his money, being about 20 pistoles in it, and holding it rather carelessly, she snatched it out of his hand, starting immediately, and he has never since heard of it, nor does he think he should know the girl again. So she robbed him. She told him she was going to give him some in the bushes, and she robbed him. On Wednesday, April the 10th, 1771, Captain Richardson brought Henry into Savannah Lamar. In the evening, received a note from Mr. Hayward acquainting me that 2 young men were come passengers and Captain Richardson from Mr. Hewitt to me. They were Mr. Willem Thompson and Francis Scott. I wonder, is he talking about Francis Scott Key? Thistlewood made them welcome and noted they seemed both sensible, well-behaved men. Captain Richardson had also brought goods for Mr. Thistlewood. There were boxes containing cloths and clothing. Fibber got 6 pairs of shoes and much cloth for herself. John got 12 pairs of stockings and not long after his father began to wear today 7 new white shirts, 6 cravats, and 6 new nightcaps, white hat, broadcloth coat every day. So they were splashing. Greetings, Anthony McPhail. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm so glad you're here. There were tubs of English trees, most of them dead, and there were books, The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy, Gentleman, Volume 9, London, 1767, Curious Plates, The Wanton Widow, or The Amours and Intrigues of John Stewart and the Widow Carleton, London, 1769. Benjamin Franklin's Experiments and Observations on Electricity, and many other works of fiction, biography, philosophy, medical and dental care, law, travel, and agriculture. The arrivals of Captain Richardson were red letter days in the Thistlewood household. The 2 new arrivals, Thompson and Scott, were gardeners. They spent a few days on Thistlewood's pen, helping in the garden and planting seeds Mr. Scott had brought with him. They also had an early introduction to slave ceremony. On Saturday, April 20th, Rose, the Egypt doctress, died. Next day, Thistlewood took them to her burial, where they saw the dancing. And at the beginning of the next week, they both went to Retrieve Estate as bookkeepers, each at £35 per year. Early in 1772, Thompson went as overseer to Mr. Weech's Spring Garden Estate in Catherine. Francis Scott stayed longer at Retrieve and was a frequent visitor at Mr. Thistlewood's there. With a common interest in horticulture, they worked in the gardens and became fast friends. In February 1774, Scott went as overseer on Aikendown Estate in Westmoreland. For some time before 1771, there had been no mention of the Maroons, and in that year there was only one when in late March a party of them arrived on the pen offering tobacco for sale. Thistlewood bought 4 rolls for 2 bits, which I sold again. Nor until the later part of the year was there any reference to punishment for prohibited behavior or unrest among the slaves. On Saturday, November 2nd, here Fraser's Beck on Thursday last was tried for having supper and a great number of Negroes at her house last Saturday night. Had her ear slit, 39 lashes under the gallows, and 39 again against the long stores. Tomlinson's Abington, Bogle, and Hamilton, a bit cut out of his ear, and ditto lashes. Also several others flogged. Several are runaway. So this is back when they were trying to prohibit the movement of black people and slaves, and they were punishing them for congregating together. In April of 1770, Samuel Say had accepted an offer from Martin Williams of the overseership at Old Hope Estate and had gone to live there. His pen, which he visited from time to time, was left in the care of Vine, for whom a new house had been built by Carpenter Cumberland. Thistlewood kept a supervisory eye on the property. Vine and Thibba were old friends, and now each was in charge of a household, the former for her absent master, the latter for her own home. Thistlewood's notes on the 2 women and their friends and relations, some of whom he also knew very well, are illustrative of his attitudes toward and relationships with individual slaves, not all of whom were of privileged domestic or skilled occupation. Monday, January 22nd, 1770, here Jack, who is Paradise Frankie's husband, got the yaws. She has never had them. On Friday, June 29th, 1770, little Nancy, Paradise Cuba's and thus Fibba's granddaughter, took with vomiting last night. Fibba stayed in the cookroom to assist little Catalina with her all night. Sunday, August 19th, 1770, old Pompey, Vine's father, belonging to Mr. Myler, come to see Fibba. Wednesday, September 12th, 1770, Vine quarreled with my Negroes for taking dry wood off Mr. Say's land. I discharged them from going there again, as I have a great abundance. Luna, who is Mr. Say's, is here baking cakes. Thursday, September 20th, 1770, House Frankie slept in John's bed tonight. She is going to Egypt. Saturday, November 3rd, 1770, that afternoon, Vine and Miss Cowlings and Scylla over to see Fibba, gave them some grapes. Saturday, November 17th, 1770, a daughter of the late Mason Quashie, named Frankie, also belonging to Mr. P. Gordon, and her husband, a Negro fellow, a Mason, belonging to Middle Ground, named James Knight, came here to see Fibba. Thursday, December 13th, 1770, this morning lent Vine Mackey horse to ride to Old Hope, Mr. Say, who has been ill, being worse again. Sunday, March 31st, 1771, Fibba's Cuba, who with others was visiting her sick mother, brought a mare and asked me to leave to let her go here. Friday, April 19th, 1771, gave Fibba's Cuba a pistole. She is going to London soon. So how was she an enslaved person going to London and he was giving her money to go? Isn't that interesting? Thursday, May 6th, 1771, gave Vine a Ward's red pill for her father, old Pompey, who is not well. Vine gave me a fine musk melon for it. Monday, August 19th, 1771, little member carried from Egypt to Paradise this morning in the canoe and said to be going to miscarry. Sunday, September 1st, 1771, returned Frankie's money to Fibba, 5 double loons and 2 pistoles, which equals 26 pounds, 2 shillings, and 6 dittos. The money I had of her December 7th and 31st, 1770. So he had her money for almost a year. He was a brokey. He was a broke slave owner. Saturday, September 7th, 1771, Cuba's husband here today, also Diana from Paradise. I have not seen her in many years. Saturday, September 28th, 1771, Egypt Lucy slept upon the ironing table in the cookroom last night. She is in a poor state of health yet. She had been ill for months. On the 23rd of June, Fibba had gone to Egypt to visit her, very ill. Wednesday, November 13th, 1771, Here, Phoebus Cuba got herself christened at home. Sunday, December 1st, 1771. Here, Mr. Parker sent little Member very bad in a canoe to paradise this morning. Thursday, January 2nd, 1772. The Cranbrook, Captain Sooty, come in this evening. Mr. Cope, 3 daughters, and Cuba came ashore. Sunday, January 5th, 1772, sent Miss Cope 50 bunches of grapes, flowers, and a pair of wild ducks per Jimmy. Jimmy also carried little Nancy home, and John went with him likewise. Sent House Frankie and Cuba together, Teal. Thursday, January 9th, 1772. Early in the morning, old Pompey died. Lent Vine Jimmy to go acquaint her friends at Cabarita Estate. Saturday, January the 11th, 1772. In the middle of last night, Phoebus Cuba come from paradise to see her. On Monday, January the 13th, 1772, young Jenny, who was Cuba's, come here to see her mother today. On Monday, April the 6th, 1772, Paradise's little Member, or rather Egypt one, going this day to live with Mr. John Hartnell at Retrieve Estate. Suspect she is not yet clear from the clap, as she had it very bad when she went to Paradise 2 or 3 months ago sick. Mr. Cope also had it soon after, and Mr. John Hartnell certainly in for it now. So this is how these sexually transmitted diseases were being transmitted. Little Member had it, and Mr. Cope was sleeping with Mr. Hartnell's woman, and all three of them were just passing it amongst each other. Saturday, April 11th, 1772, Paradise Cuba, alias Jenny Young, here to see her mother. She, Vine, Sally, Sancho, Juba from Say's Pen, Louis, Neptune from Egypt, Jimmy, My Cuba, Abba, Maria, and others who belong to Thistlewood were fishing in the deep rock holes, but too much water for them yet. However, they got goddams. Thursday, May 21st, 1772, Mr. Say's Vine has the fever very bad yet, and her master and others takes but little notice of her. Friday, June 5th, 1772, as Vine's hogs make sad work in the Rockhole Provision Ground, sent her word this morning, and she is greatly affronted. 3 weeks later, on the 27th, after her long illness, Egypt Lucy died and was buried the next day. Fibba and John went to her burial. On Tuesday, July 21st, 1772, in the afternoon, Vine's hogs in standing Limekiln Provision Ground showed them to her. On Friday, July 24th, in the morning, Mr. Hughes called at my house, and I was witness to his paying Vine 17 pounds for a horse he bought of her. Now, Vine was an enslaved person, remember? But she had a horse that Mr. Hughes was coming to buy from her, but they couldn't buy their freedom. Sunday, August the 16th, 1772, bought of Cuba, alias Jenny Young, her heifer, Diana's cow calf for 5 pounds, which I paid her before Fibba. So this is how they were keeping each other honest in some regards because they always had witnesses to these financial transactions. Sunday, September the 6th, 1772, sent Mrs. Cope some asparagus by John, who rode to paradise to see Jenny Young and Frankie, who are said to be both sick. Through all these events, Thistlewood had not in any way neglected his gardens and provision grounds. There was a constant planting of seeds, seedlings, suckers, slips, and young trees, often received from neighbors, regularly from England, and occasionally from North America. On Wednesday, May 9th, 1770, sent Mr. Hayward some Indian kale roots. He sent me some seeds, such as carrots, radish, turnips, and parsley. Thursday, May 17th, 1770, sowed a bed of Battersea asparagus seeds. This day flowered in English pink of a beautiful red in my garden, which is the first I have seen or heard of to have flowered in the island. The plant is flourishing and will have many flowers. There's a footnote here. As we have seen, Thistlewood occasionally claimed to be the first to have brought a plant to flowering in Jamaica. The best known Jamaican gardener of the later 18th century was undoubtedly Hinton East, Esquire, in the mountains of La Guiana at Gordontown. A catalog of the plants in his garden lists plants giving the botanical name, the popular name, and the place of origin, and the name of the individual responsible for the first importation or planting of non indigenous species. Mr. Thistlewood's name does not appear, but he, and probably others, such as Mr. Ricketts, was certainly entitled to mention, for there is clear evidence that he was up to date with, and in some instances ahead of, the listed innovators. Let us take two important examples: a very popular fruit, the mango, and what became after emancipation a very popular fruit, the breadfruit. According to Arthur Broughton, the compiler of the 1794 Hortus Estentius Catalog, the breadfruit first arrived in Jamaica in February of 1793 from the province of Tahiti, Captain Bligh of earlier bounty fame. The plant is not listed among those in Mr. East's catalog or botanical garden. However, there is an earlier reference suggesting that it was grown on Jamaica before 1790. The mango tree and the mangosteen, according to Broughton, were in the East Garden and had been brought to Jamaica by Lord Rodney in 1782. Rodney had captured a French vessel bringing mango seedlings from Mauritius to the French West Indies and had sent them to Jamaica, but Thistlewood records earlier plantings of both. So, who was telling the truth? Since Thistlewood seems to take credit for all of these different things, Thistlewood also has another extensive set of journals if you're interested in reading them yourself about his garden and his planting and all of the different things that he says he was the first one to bring it to flower. And like all other gardeners, he knew the perils of floods, droughts, and insects. On Tuesday, July 17th, 1770, he writes, "Never knew so many caterpillars. Cabbage, savoys, broccoli, turnips, peas, cucumbers, all eat to pieces by them. Even the grass and bushes in the pasture full of them. In September, he had listed the things in my garden, September 1770, growing. The list included 30 varieties of trees, flowering and timber, about 25 kinds of ornamental shrubs and flowering plants, 35 sorts of fruit trees, and about 20 different herbs and spices, and varieties of vegetables and legumes. Of tubers, he had several, including yams and potatoes, and he was experimenting with cereals, rice for himself and his slaves, and barberry for his horses. On Monday, April the 1st, 1771, cut my lucerne, which is now in flower. Also cut my barberry wheat, which is now above 2 feet high, and was cut 5 or 6 weeks ago for horse meat. Of the trees and seeds from England, the majority had failed. In the 3 years from 1768 to 1770, he had imported over 200 different kinds of which only about 20 were still growing in 1770. His produce was in demand on special occasions. On Sunday, March 29, 1772, as the governor, who was Sir William Trelawney Bart, dines at Mr. Cope's today, I sent them by Bess a teal, a whistling duck, and 2 Spanish snipes, 10 large broccoli, about 3 quarts of English peas in the pods, and a large calabash full of asparagus. Also 4 ripe figs, 3 sweet limes, and flowers. Then, on the 31st, he sent flowers to Mr. Weech's house, where the governor and his party had stopped. And on the 5th of April, as His Excellency dined with Mr. Herod, Thistlewood was again the supplier of 12 heads of fine broccoli, English peas, asparagus, and flowers aplenty. On Saturday, April 11th, 1772, Mr. Weech says the governor and his lady several times expressed a great desire to come and see my garden, but were prevented by Mr. Houghton's representing the road to be so very rocky and bad. Early in May, Thistlewood has supplied 8 varieties of local seeds to be delivered to a Dr. Lowther in England. They included poinciana, Barbados pride, ringworm bush, and the Spanish carnation, with references to literary notices of them. For instance, the ringworm bush, Vide Brown's History of Jamaica, page 224, and for some others, see Miller's Gardner Dictionary, article Poinciana, and Granger's Sugarcane, page 36 notes. Thursday, the 19th of March, 1772, this is the day of choosing church gardens and vestrymen at Savannah Lamar, but I did not go, as it is all a farce, for all the vestry justices carry all as they please owing to their numbers. Thistlewood was not yet himself a magistrate, but he served as a juror, and he had complaint thereto. In January, on the grand jury, they had for dinner consumed punch, cherry brandy, mixed white wine in great plenty, mutton chops in a very extravagant manner, came to 26 bits each. And when he paid John Collum, the foreman, he re-emphasized in his diary, if nowhere else, his disapproval of such vile and shameful customs. Wednesday, April 15th, 1772, in the evening, called at Mr. Weech's, supped there. Mrs. Cook played us many tunes on the harpsichord and sang also. Captain Richardson and Miss Polly Cope there stayed till past 10 o'clock, then went home. Sunday, May the 5th, 1772, Moll Stout, who was Mulatto Dave's sister, and Lucy, kept by Mr. Neal the wheelwright, come to see Fibber. In May, he paid his taxes. Parish tax on slaves, 3 shillings, 9 dittos each, and on stock, 1 shilling, 8 dittos each. Cost him £5, 11 shillings, 8 dittos. Poll tax at 2 shillings per slaves, and 6 dittos per head of stock. Cost him £2, 14 shillings, and 6 dittos more. Such enormous taxes were, I believe, never known in Jamaica before. Thomas Tomlinson, the collector, says his commissions he expects will be £500 this year. Sunday, May 17th, 1772, Fibber sold her filly, which is a Phyllis mare, to Long Pond Melia for £5, 13 shillings, 9 dittos cash, and delivered her. In August, Mulatto John was in trouble. He had been given money to pay Mr. Hughes for a quarter year's schooling, and change was expected back. He brought home a note from Mr. Hughes and 1.5 pistoles instead of the 2 which his father expected. Thistlewood wrote to Mr. Hughes and sent the money back. Friday, August 21st, 1772, in the evening, Mr. Hughes came home with John and protests that he sent a pistole and 2 half dittos by John, although he stiffly denied to me, now confessed that he opened the paper on the road against Mr. Stone's and dropped half a pistole. But as he is given to lying, what confidence can be put in what he says? His mother promotes his ruin by excessive indulgence, and humoring him beyond all bounds. Received the pistole and a half of Mr. Hughes, and I won't sit down content. With the loss of the half pistole, so ends the affair. Monday, September 7th, 1772, had some words with Fibber this morning about Jimmy's behavior yesterday when sent on an errand, and she bringing the handkerchief for him to screen him. In December, Mr. Say, who had been ill, died at Old Hope and was buried in Mr. Williams' burial ground. He was born in 1729, so was about 43 and a half years old. He had named Thistlewood as one of the executors of his will, and this was to become enormously burdensome to Thistlewood. Mr. Say's business affairs had been exceedingly complicated. Upon Mr. Say's death, Martin Williams offered Thistlewood the overseership of Old Hope. Not surprisingly, the offer was refused. Thomas Thistlewood was now a gentleman pen proprietor and horticulturalist of note. On Friday, January the 1st, 1773, this morning I shot an alligator in Coromante Pond. Mr. Richard Crutcher and Mr. John Ricketts, Esquire of Ridgeland, present. Mr. Ricketts gave me an advertisement of trees bought and sold by Mr. William Prince near New York. Saturday, January the 2nd, Fibba made me a present of £10, 18 shillings, and 1.5 dittos, all in silver. Money she has earned by sowing, baking cassava, muskmelons, and watermelons out of her own ground. So he was sexually assaulting this woman. He had made her a mother, and I guess she had made peace with it and was now giving him financial gifts because she knew he was broke. Greetings, KW Don 7. Thanks so much for tuning in. On February the 3rd, he visited the Morelands estate and drank chocolate with Mr. George Williams, saw his caraco birds, mountain witches, bantam fowls, monkey, fox, squirrel, raccoon, rabbits, and guinea pigs. Jimmy was with me. In late April, the annual clothing supplies arrived, and Fibba got her check, linen, handkerchiefs, needles, hat, cloak, and everything else. And John, his hat, shoes, stockings, and other supplies. In May, John was encouraged in kite making by the gift of a ball of twine for that purpose. And mid-month, John's quarter being up at school, he fetched his books and came home, paid Mr. Hughes £5, full to this date, and had his receipt, intend keeping John now at home to learn him the ministration of superficies and solids. And it would seem John was not an entirely wayward student, for in November he was given my prospect glass, which I have had ever since I was a boy. It magnifies 4 times. Thursday, September the 9th, 1773, at about 8 a.m., John Merrick, Williams, Esquire, and Mr. Ferris come to see Mr. Say's houses in Penn, which I showed them, and asked £1,200 for them. They did not buy. Later in the same month, Say's slaves were given a day off to clean themselves. Then, next day, Tuesday the 28th, they were taken to Savannah Lamar and sold, 30 in number. They fetched £2,216. Lincoln bought 2, Strap for £77 and Fanny for £85. The pid remained unsold until November, when it was purchased by Mr. James White for £1,500, payable in 3 installments. Friday, September the 17th, 1773, received a letter from Mr. William Ricketts, Esquire, with 2 mango stones covered with wax and 12 Bengal peach stones. Received them by Mr. John Hartnell's boy. Monday, September 20th, 1773, planted in new garden 11 Bengal peach stones and 2 mango stones. Note, one of the mango stones is about 4 inches long, 2 broad, and 8/10 of an inch thick. Both furrowed lengthways, enclosed in wax, from 2 to 3/10 thick, and this wrapped up in a wax cloth. Seemed pretty fresh. There's a note here. It says, here we have Thistlewood planting mango seeds, not seedlings, in 1773. They did not grow, it is true, but in January of 1786, on Friday the 6th, he planted a mango seedling and a breadfruit sucker. 7 years before, in 1779, almost to the day, he had gone to see a young mango tree, now about 2.5 feet high, on Greenwich, which is known as Friendship Estate. Even earlier, on Thursday, October 5th, 1769, he had noted, "Here Miss Drummond and Dr. Rucastle have purchased Dr. Fraser's place in the Grill, that Mr. John Pulley Edwards has rented Basin Spring or Beeston Spring, and that Montague James Esquire is introducing the mango into this island." He gives no further mention of Mr. James, but perhaps it is from his earlier introduction that we received his mango seeds in 1773. If so, there were bearing trees in Jamaica before that date. On Monday, October 25th, 1773, received a letter from Mr. Palmels with the loan of The Natural History of Barbados in 10 books by Reverend Mr. Griffith Hughes, rector of St. Lucy's Parish in the said island, and published in London, 1750, with a map of the island, figures of plants. Tuesday, November 16th, 1773, heard today that Dr. Drummond bought mulatto Tommy Drummond from John Fitzgerald at a vast price and given him free. So that was his son that he was buying. Friday, November 26th, 1773, Vine at my house in the evening. When she went home, had good sport by pulling a line with a cloth tied to it. She is exceedingly timorous. On the pen, he was involved in developing one of his more recent enterprises. Mulatto Davy had been hired for some weeks to carry out general repairs and also to build a bee's house. The year 1774 opened sadly for Egypt Primus, who, on January 12th, lost his second wife. He had had more than one. Egypt Betty, one of Primus's wives, had died in August of 1772. Now it was Egypt Dido, once a great favorite of Mr. Thistlewood. There were other notable deaths during the year. In June, Hugh Gunning, who had been the overseer at Long Pond Estate and the best overseer I knew, and on the last day of the month, here old Mr. Benjamin Banton, one of his neighbors at the Vineyard Pen of St. Elizabeth, is dead. In August, on Saturday, the 6th, another past favorite, Egypt Susanna, died of the smallpox, which was then epidemic. During July, Mr. White, recently come to live on his newly purchased pen, had lost 5 slaves by it in 3 days. And in October, the body of one of the planter class who had died in England, Mr. Williams Lewis, grandfather of Matthew Gregory Monk Lewis, is arrived at Savannah Lamar, bought by Captain Duthie, to be buried at Cornwall, at his request, to be put beside his wife, Jane Lewis, in the family mausoleum on Cornwall Estate. So it was a year of great loss for the enslaved population and for him and his planter class of friends. On Saturday, January 22nd, took a boxing stick today from Paradise Sam. What, you may ask, is a boxing stick? It's a stick used in fighting. Something that they call stick licking is what they do with that. It is made of heavy hard wood and is about 1 inch square and 20 and 7/10 of an inch long, rather tapering towards the end held by the hand and rounded for better holding in the hand for near 10 inches, with a hole for a string 3 and 8/10 of an inch from the end. This is a very unlawful weapon for Negroes to be permitted to have. On Sunday, the 23rd, as on most Sundays, the slaves went visiting. Paradise Frankie visited Pibba, as did Egypt Maria. The latter had come on business too. On more than one occasion, Thistlewood, and presumably Pibba also, advanced capital or credit to enable individual slaves to acquire goods for trade, gave Egypt Maria an order or letter to Mr. Abraham Tavares, Sr., to let her have what she wanted as far as 40 shillings. She took up £2, 1 shilling, and 3 dittos. Fibba had recently been finding that weakening eyesight was hindering her performance with needles and thread. At the beginning of February, Thistlewood provided her with a pair of spectacles as her eyes begin to be so bad. She cannot sew without them, except very coarse indeed. Although Mr. and Mrs. White had moved into the neighboring pen, Vine was still there, and was still, it seems, in pursuit of companionship. On May the 9th, which was a Monday, Dugald Ferguson came according this afternoon to Vine, which excited Thistlewood. On Monday, May 23rd, Mr. Dugald Ferguson, Vine's sweetheart, slept with her last night, and now at 8 o'clock in the morning is not up yet. He gave her a piece of base metal, which he called a pistole, that is worth nothing. The woman is a fool. On Thursday, June 23rd, 1774, this morning, Vine left her house in Mr. White's land for good, being partly drove away to make room for their mother, the widow Callum, who was disordered in her senses. Vine gone to Cabarita Estate, I believe. So she was chased off the land to make room for somebody's mom. And there were others who were, from other causes, pushed to move. Cope John had long been in debt. Egypt Estate was heavily mortgaged and creditors were pressing. On May 20th, 1774, Mr. and Mrs. Cope sold Paradise Estate, which was a total of 1,650 acres, with all its works, houses, Negroes, except 75 to be retained by them, cattle and equipment, to Mr. John Somerville and Mr. John Cunningham as equal partners for £10,500. Mr. Chambers was the lawyer involved, and his son and Thistlewood were witnesses to the Copes' signatures. The Copes were to move later in the year to Egypt, but meanwhile, the old Egypt Great House was being torn down and rebuilt. And at Salt River, also once the property and home of Mr. William Durrill, at the same time the deputy marshal's men were making a levy upon some of the Salt River stock. The Negroes rescued them before they could get out of the pasture, upon which a scuffle ensued, in which several were wounded on both sides, and one of the Salt River women shot. who is since dead. Affidavits making by Mr. Brodie and by Gilbert Sr., Sr.'s overseer, so will be a deal to do about it. 5 days after the sale of Paradise, John Cope's son, Master Holton Cope, died. His body was taken to Egypt for burial. Thibba, Damsel, Jenny Young, and Egypt Quasheba had sat up with the body on the night of May 26th. And sometime during 1774, a much older acquaintance, Mr. Vassall's mulatto Dick, formerly of Vineyard, also died. So they were dropping like flies left and right. Thibba herself was soon to go down again with one of her now fairly frequent illnesses. On June 6th, she was sick at her stomach. Little Nellie, House Frankie's child, apparently spending time with Thibba, was also ill, and both Thibba and Thistlewood had been having teeth pulled. Nonetheless, the work and the gossip and all the rest went on as usual. Wednesday, the 7th, planted of 1774, planted in the garden, rose apple seeds brought for him from Kingston by Mr. Peter Richardson, and a bay or macafat nuts sent by Mr. Duncan. Tuesday, June 14th, 1774, here Mr. Lopez's mulatto sweetheart, in Mr. Lopez's absence at the estate, had Cumberland, Creek Venus's son, caught her in her room with her in the night, and that she had chains put on her neck and sent to the field. On Thursday, June 16th, 1774, several vessels gone out this morning, Mr. Thomas Audley gone off in Captain Blake, George Robert Gooden, Esquire, William Woolery, Esquire, and his wife, John Ricketts of Richland, and others, and Captain Van Horn to North America. Wednesday, June 22nd, 1774, wrote to John Cope, Esquire, by John returned Robinson Crusoe 2 volumes, and sent him a paper of distances on Cabarita River. Returned Dr. Panton's Milne's Botany, also gave him some borage, celery, curled parsley, and cardon seeds. On Saturday, August 20th, 1774, the head of gold, the rebel, carried to leeward this evening to be put up as a terror. Warren is to be transported. A white man hanged at Savannah Lamar today for killing a sailor at Lucia. It seems he made many bitter speeches against the Scotch, not all agreeable to them, being pretty near the truth. There was no further explanation of the activities or apprehension of Gold or of Warren, nor had there been any note of recent slave uprisings. Even the Maroons were scarcely mentioned, only once in 1773, when one of them captured Egypt's Dover in the mountains and brought him home, and in mid-1774, when Thistlewood barely noted a strange report of wild Negroes' impudence and refractoriness. On Saturday, August 13th, 1774, paid Mr. Thomas Tomlinson, collecting constable, 12 shillings for deficiency tax to June 28th last. Landed proprietors were by the deficiency laws required to employ one white person for every 30 slaves in their possession or pay a tax. Thistlewood paid the tax. Wow. So he didn't have very many white people on his plantation at all. And he would rather pay a tax than to employ other white people, probably because the tax was cheaper than hiring a white person. In mid August, John Hartnell suffered the barbs of misfortune. At the earnest request of Mr. Parker, little Member was taken away from him and sent back to Egypt to wash and sew. On that estate, work on the great house was in progress. The Copeses still lived at Paradise, but John Cope spent days at Egypt seeing to the work and often spent the night at Thistlewood's house in the Blue Room, and, it seems, alone. For a change, Thistlewood was in his debt. He owed Cope for rum, sugar, and 2 years of Phoebus hire, totaling £54, 4 shillings, and no dittos, from which he would deduct $25 for 2 steers he had sold to Cope. On Monday, September the 19th of 1774, received a note from Mr. Abraham Tavares, Sr., by a Jew on foot, begging for a few sprigs of myrtle to adorn their tabernacle, but I had none. Received a note from Mr. Moses Nunez, Jr., begging for some myrtle. Sent a sent a large bunch of flowers. So he didn't send any to Tavares, who had sent a Jew who was begging for some. But this Mr. Moses Nunez Jr. got some myrtle from him. That's interesting. I wonder why. On the 16th of October, Jenny Young made a match with Mr. Limburner from Paradise. On the 17th, Thistlewood visited the Copes at Paradise, then on to Mr. Houghton's, where he found Mr. Cope trimming vines in the garden. Then he and Mr. Cope went to Mr. Blake's, where again they walked in the garden. But for Thistlewood, the most memorable events at the end of 1774 came perhaps on the evening of November 8th. On that day, he visited Mr. Pommel's at his property, the Wilderness. He notes, walked in his indigo plantation, very pretty, about 4 acres, very fine, and 4 acres more ready to plant as soon as he receives seed from North America. He has already made about 150 pounds weight in very good indeed. And then, on his return to Breadnut Pen Island, he found Mrs. Cope and Mrs. Polly Cope there. Mr. Cope had gone to Kingston on assembly business, and they had been at Egypt to see the work going on. They stayed the night, sleeping in the blue room, with a candle burning all night in the hall. They left the next day with gifts of sweet times, flowers, and forbidden fruit. Forbidden fruit was a citrus fruit so called because the marks on the skin were supposed to be Eve's finger marks as she plucked the fruit. On Wednesday, January the 18th, 1775, went to Dr. King's to see Mr. Matthew Bowen, and he gave me a great variety of flower seeds sent him from North America by Mr. Gooden. And Dr. King lent me The History and Reign of Emperor Charles V, Volume 1, Second Edition, London, 1772. A week before, he had borrowed from Mr. Hayward a book called The Fable of the Bees, or Private Vice, Public Benefits, with an essay on charity and charity schools, ninth edition from Edinburgh, published in 1754 at 374 pages, wrote by Bernard de Mandeville. Sunday, February the 12th, 1775, for 235 corn, 7 bits. John bought them in the road. Saturday, February 18th, 1775, began to learn John to shoot this day, and he shot 2 plover with the first shot. On January the 10th, John Cope had been sworn in as custos of Westmoreland, and now, at the end of February, he was entertaining the governor, Sir Basil Keith. He was succeeding John James Barclay. Again, the supplies came from Thistlewood's pen: plovers, a mess of cuckold increased peas, 14 carrots, 12 cucumbers, a large mess of broccoli, asparagus, 6 sweet limes, a watermelon, ripe prickly pear fruit, and plenty of flowers. On Wednesday, March 15th, 1775, John Cope, Richard Vassall, William Blake Esquire dined with me and stayed till about 9 in the evening. Mr. Cope stayed all night. Had mutton broth, roast mutton and broccoli, carrots and asparagus, stewed mudfish, roast goose and pawpaw, applesauce, stewed giblets, some fine lettuce, which Mr. Vassall brought me, crabs, cheese, muskmelon, punch, porter, ale, cider, Madeira wine, and brandy. The next day he, and perhaps the others too, was very unwell with drinking too much wine yesterday. He had entertained some of the elite plantocracy. John Cope, we know, short of money, shorter of land than he used to be, but none the less the Custos. The Blakes, whose family owned over 4,500 acres in Westmoreland. St. Elizabeth and St. Anne and Vassall, whose family owned land in Westmoreland. St. James and St. Elizabeth, even though the vineyard had been sold, totaling about 6,500 acres. And 5 weeks later, the Copes returned the invitation. On Tuesday, March 21st, he dined at Paradise in the company of Mr. and Mrs. Cope and their daughters, Hannah and Polly, Judge Blake, Captain Blake, Nicholas Blake, Mrs. Blake, and her sons, Mr. and Mrs. Vassall and their daughters, Captain Towers, and after dinner the company was joined by Mr. and Mrs. Beckford, who had landed in state from the Earl of Effingham, Captain Jesse Carling, 2 months before, and Mr. Young Bellamy. After tea, Thistlewood, attended by Jimmy, rode home. Jimmy very drunk. I must inquire how he comes at the liquor. On Monday, May 1st, Mulatto John, now 15 years old, born 29th April 1760, was appointed to Mr. William Hornby, a carpenter. The indenture was for 6 years, to begin that day, and Thistlewood paid down £8 in cash. The next morning, accompanied by Jimmy, who carried his bed and brought back his horse, John went to live at Hornby's to come home only as his master allowed. In June, Thistlewood began experimenting with indigo, some of which he grew in his gardens. Mr. Palmel's was highly complimentary. He said that Thistlewood's indigo was the best he has ever seen made in the island and is equal to Guatemala indigo. In July, he, Cope, and William Henry Ricketts went back to Palmel's where they viewed the house, indigo cistern, and other things. Mr. Sharp of 3 Mile River was with us also, rode to the indigo piece and about 10 acres now planted. At the end of April, the Copes House Negroes, Myrtilla, Suki, Big Nellie, Peggy, Nancy, and Jenny Young, had been transferred from Paradise to Egypt. A month later, Mr. Parker left the Egypt overseership. He was succeeded by James Limburner, which, in Thistlewood's opinion, was a sure sign that Mr. Cope resolved to ruin himself. Very soon after, in late May and early June, Fibba endured another of her sudden bouts of severe illness. On May 30th, she and little mulatto Bessie, who was the daughter of Salt River Cooper Davis and his woman Deborah, who had come to stay with her, were both ill, and Thistlewood had them bled. On Thursday, June the 1st, 1775, at 1 p.m., wrote to Mrs. Cope by Jimmy for Jenny, who came directly and stayed all night. In the evening, Mr. Limburner rode over and stayed a while, and many of Egypt's Negroes, as Quashiba, Little Member, Sibby, Julina, Little Nellie, and others, came to see Fibba. After medication and with her daughter's care, Fibba gradually recovered. Young Jenny went back to Egypt on Friday the 2nd, and on Tuesday the 6th, a couple of days after she got better, he came in Fibba that night. On Wednesday, the 7th of June, 1775, rode to Savannah Lamar, returned to dinner. Great expectation of news from North America, however, very little in the paper. On July 1st, Thistlewood again listed the plants growing in his gardens and provision grounds. There were over 300, but it seems the mangoes and Bengal peaches had not grown. Many were plants of little use, for he named everything from uncultivated fungi in the fields, John Joes, a species of mushroom, so called, through to recently imported plants, rose apple, lately introduced from East India, flowers, trees, and vegetables of which he had imported the seeds, such as Virginian stock and blue lupines from North America, and asparagus, purple and white broccoli, and ash, elm, and 4 varieties of apples from England. Of particular interest is his list of food crops in the Negro provision grounds. There were plantains, horse and maiden, bananas, maize or Indian corn, guinea corn, scratch toyer, cocoa roots, cassava, bitter and sweet, pindas, and sugarcane. Pindas are ground nuts or peanuts. About 60 of his listed items had been sent by Henry Hewitt of Brompton. About 25 had been obtained from various sources in North America, and the rest were from local gardens, fields, and waysides. It was an impressive collection. Mr. Thistlewood's half of the most runate paradise pen, which he and Mr. Say jointly acquired, was now a showpiece. Not so next door. In June, Mr. White had sold his pen to Mr. Hugh Wilson, a surveyor who moved in August. On Monday, August the 8th, 1775, Mrs. Wilson and two mulatto women at his house slept there tonight, and I believe they are come for good. This, it seems, is his wedding night with Mr. J. Townsend's mulatto daughter, Sally. The other mulatto woman was Sally's sister, Nancy Brown, and they soon became frequent visitors to Mr. Thistlewood's house, where they gossiped with Fibba and from time to time were entertained by Thistlewood himself, who showed them his prints and put on the magic lantern show. In mid August, Thistlewood rode to Egypt and had tea with Miss Cope and her daughters, now in residence, and Miss Polly Clark from the Valley Tavern. Miss Cope said Monsignors Houghton, Blake, and Herring have received letters from town intimating that this island will shortly be invaded by the Spaniards. Thursday, August 31st, 1775, in the morning, rode over to Egypt, returned Mr. Cope the evidence, lent me on the petition presented by the West India planters and merchants to the Honorable House of Commons, and lent him the present state of Great Britain and her North America colonies. Rode with him to Top Hill, and he has just had all genup trees cut down. Genup trees are bearing bunches of green, grape shaped, brittle skinned fruit, round, seeded, with a sweet pulpy overlay. They were of no commercial value and not cultivated even today, but they were much favored. Surprising notions he has. I returned home to dinner on Saturday, September the 23rd, 1775. Mr. Wilson, having just got home from town this afternoon, come over and drank tea with us, received my watch from him, and cleaned by Mr. John Urquhart, watchmaker in Kingston, for which I paid £1 sterling. Mr. Wilson has patented a piece of land in my name without acquainting me with it till now. Not the thing. Sunday, September 24th, 1775, sent Mr. Wilson a cuba of tea and a bunch of asparagus. On Thursday, September 28th, 1775, it seems Miss Sally says Mr. Wilson has only to use her words, pleasured her 3 times since he had her, and they came August 7th. At the end of October, Thistlewood sent his horse for John, who was very ill at Mr. Hornby's. Medicated, bled, and looked after by Fibba, he remained home until November 20th, when he was well enough to go back to his master's to go to work. Gave him 2 bits. On Friday, October 20th, 1775, the Custos offered today. He had dined with the Copes to me to get a commission to be a justice of a peace if I would act. So this is him climbing the social ladder again. Saturday, December 2nd, 1775, Mr. Cope lent me the first volume of the history of Jamaica in 3 volumes, illustrated with cutouts, London 1774, published by Longs. These are Mr. George Murray's Sunday. These are Mr. George Murray's. On Sunday, December 17th, 1775, received a letter from Mr. Wardlow, acquainting me that the governor has been pleased to appoint me to one of His Majesty's Justices of the Peace for the parish of Westmoreland, dated 15th instant. On December 31st, 1775, about 11 p.m., Mr. Wilson come down and called me. He, hearing several guns fired towards Savannah Lamar, suspected it to be an alarm. I got up and went to him, but take it only to be people drinking out the old year. And so it was, for January passed without much comment on war or rebellion. On Sunday, January the 7th, 1776, met one of Nisbet's Negroes with 2 mahogany chairs, which bought him 4 bits each and ordered him to carry them to my house and wait till the evening that I should be back. But he told Fibba I had brought them at 5 bits apiece and had ordered him to apply to her for the money, which she was weak enough to believe. Then he immediately went away. On Saturday, January 27th, 1776, had sex with mulatto Bessie, Hungerford Cooper's Davy, on the bench under the shed in the new garden. It wasn't very good. Undeterred by his satisfaction, he twice again took Bessie to the bench, but never to his pleasure. On the 18th of February, he dined at Egypt, where Mr. Cope showed him letters from the governor, who had been informed that a great force of a squadron of ships of the line was assembled at Hispaniola. A meeting of the gentlemen of the parish was to be called to consult what to do in case of an invasion. The parish vestry had already had a meeting on the subject. On February 27th, the St. Peter Captain Towers arrived. One of those arrived in her was Egypt's little Nellie, just come from England. Thistlewood was expecting the Henry with his usual supplies of cloths and clothing. She came in on March 1st. Throughout March, Jenny Young was ill. She was pregnant, and Mr. Limburner was discussing plans and conditions. On Monday, April the 8th, 1776, Mr. Limburner told me his Jenny Young's, Frankie, and Fibba's intention to giving Negroes for Nancy's freedom, and the child Jenny Young is now big of if a mulatto. So he was talking about setting them free if Jenny Young, Fibba's daughter, had a mulatto child. But on April 16th, Jenny Young miscarried. In mid-April, Egypt watchman Harry died and was there buried. On May 17th, by Dr. Richard Patton, died, age 36, at Mrs. Bennett's in Savannah, buried in Churchyard, the new one. 70 or 80 white people at his burial, including Thistlewood. I am very sorry for the loss of Dr. Panton, as he was a very sensible man, of surprising quick apprehension, a good scholar and knew his business well. Besides a friendship between us, as having something of the same turn for botany. Indeed, he had made a copy for Dr. Panton of his Diary of the Weather in 3 books, and this was shortly returned to him from the doctor's effects. The original version and several other papers were put in the hands of Captain Richardson of the Henry to be delivered to Edward Long, Esquire, at London. Edward Long was another wealthy Jamaica proprietor in the mid 18th century, whose book, History of Jamaica, had been read by Thistlewood. Thistlewood's weather books are now with Edward Long in the British Museum. The parcel, which Mr. Long must have received with mixed feelings of interest and impatience, contained a journal of the weather from the beginning of the 1770 to the 7th of June 1776, inclusive of a quantity of rain fallen, heights of the thermometer, also a general account of rain fallen since the beginning of 1761, a table of carats, fixed and specific gravity of gold, of alcohol and water, elegy on Dr. Robinson's death, his man of consequence, conclusion of his epistle to Mr. Long, also a catalogue of trees in my garden with remarks, general remarks on the weather, bearing and position of London and Breadnut Island, their distances, differences in time, and other notable facts. Also, a letter of yesterday's date, Wednesday, April the 17th, 1776. His Majesty's frigate, the Squirrel, in at at Savannah Lamar, and has seized a North American ship. Wednesday, June 12th, 1776, saw Captain Van Horn, who is lately come down from town, having been took by Lady Hewitt's schooner, going from the Cape in Hispaniola for Philadelphia with 20 tons of gunpowder, 1,200 stand of small arms, and other armaments. He walks about at liberty. On Thursday, June 13th, 1776, a report that the North Americans have took some of our vessels. By Friday, June 14th, 1776, Dr. King lent me the rights of Great Britain asserted against the claims of America, being an answer to the Declaration of the General Congress, 7th edition, to which is now added a refutation of Dr. Price's State of the National Debt, London, 1776. Monday, June 17th, 1776. This morning, the ship's fleet sailed under the convoy of the Antelope man of war. Cope, who had been given a year's leave by the governor, is gone off in the St. Peter. Captain Towers, Mr. Abysses Witter, and children, and Mr. Foreman in Captain Duthie, Dr. Alwood, his son Bob, and Jackie Dobson, and others in Captain White's, Mr. Thomas Parkinson and Robert Nichols in Captain Richardson, and Mr. William Pommels in the Beckford, Captain Hayhurst. Mr. Michael McLaughlin is also gone in the same fleet. Still suffering cash flow problems, Mr. Cope was off to see whether he could be put on the half pay list for retired servicemen and or raise money by other means. On Wednesday, July 3rd, 1776, it seems the North Americans have took the Lady Juliana, Captain Stevenson, the Reynolds, Captain Reesden, and the Juno, Captain Marsom. On Friday, July 5th, 1776, a note from Mr. Hayward and the loan of observations on the nature of civil liberty, the principles of government, and the justice and policy of the war with America, to which is added an appendix stating containing a state of national debt by Richard Price, D.D., FRS London, 1776. Sunday, July 7th, 1776. Great signs of an intended rebellion of the Negroes in Hanover, Negril Way, a store at Lucia robbed of cutlasses, which are those things they used to cut uh, cane with, and bills. On the 17th, Mr. Wilson and other militiamen were ordered to muster immediately, and the Negro who brought the message said he heard of a French war and the Negroes rising on the North Side. Thursday, July 18th, 1776, rode to Savannah Lamar to hear the news. It seems some disturbance has been on some estates at North Side, owing to a foolish indulgence of the Negroes. Returned to dinner, killed a turkey cock. Mr. Dobson and Mr. Hartnell dined with me and stayed till evening. Nonetheless, he seems to have been apprehensive and a little jittery. That evening, he set a body of troopers after a Negro well mounted who had turned into Egypt Gateway, apparently to avoid meeting the troopers. Thistlewood had questioned the man. He had no ticket, and he had ridden off, leaving some of his belongings on the roadside. Thistlewood then shouted, "Gentlemen, that Negro's a rebel," and the troopers had set off in pursuit. They got his horse, but he had managed to escape. He was later identified as a slave from Mount Eagle Estate. There were other signs of nervousness. A New Hope distiller shot a Negro fellow supposed innocent. The overseer at Orange Grove had beaten the hothouse girl to death, but the jury brought it in a natural death, and Mr. Fisher of the Free School had, under the influence of liquor, shot a white man while on guard duty at the fort. Manning's Free School in the Savannah was one of 5 such in the island. Manning's, established in 1730, was named after its founder, who provided money for the education of poor whites. Mulatto John, as we know, did not go there. For that, and for other acts, presumably, he was replaced as master of the school by a Mr. Dixon. So Mr. Fisher got drunk, shot a white man, and he was replaced by Mr. Dixon, who, said Thistlewood, bears an excellent character. He had previously commented on Mr. Fisher's fondness of the bottle and his long delay in returning a borrowed book. There was, however, more to it than alarming rumor. Ever since 1760, there had been occasional evidence of unrest among the slave population, who now outnumbered the whites by about 12 to 1. In 1765, there had been another planned rebellion in St. Mary, again led by a Coromantee slaves, and again quickly localized and quelled by the whites. In October of 1766, Thistlewood and others had been sent out hurriedly mustered expeditions against rebellious slaves in northeastern Westmoreland. 3 years later, slaves plotted to burn the city of Kingston and take control. Now, in 1776, revolt was again centered in the western parishes and led this time not by Coromantes, but by Creole slaves. Early in July of that year, a regiment of regular troops was dispatched from Lucia and Hanover to reinforce the British forces engaged against the North American revolutionaries. The plan was to seize this opportunity to attack the weakened whites, but in mid month, before it had been brought fully into action, it was discovered. Again, regular troops and neighboring militia were sent into Hanover to assist the local forces, but there was doubt of support of the Maroons, and they were indeed suspected of being involved with rebel leaders. By late July, details of the uprising were known to a now much alarmed Westmoreland planters, and Thistlewood begun to record events. On May 22nd, at the New Hope Estate Mill House, where a guard was stationed, a trooper brought an account of about 70 Negroes already took up in Hanover and many more to be took up, that many already executed and many more going to be, that the head Negro women about Lucia, even those kept by white men, were concerned, the mulattoes at Houghton Tower Estate deeply concerned, that there is a report of half the Negro men on Anchovy Bottom Estate, Martin Williams in St. James, being gone in the woods, and that a Negro named Prince, belonging to Peter Priest, was their king or head man. That Mr. Warwall first discovered oil in his pistols, that they were first to have begun the last new moon on Tuesday, some say Wednesday night, on the Spring Estate and Richmond Estate, James and Chambers. Then collected near Lucia, burnt it down, killed all white people, seized the arms, ammunition, and other things, and then proceeded and been joined by the estates as they went along. The guns at Glasgow Piazza rammed full of dirt. Billy Brown, greatly blamed for stifling intelligence he received some time ago to save some valuable Negroes of Mr. Carr's, whereas if some examples had been made, this might have been prevented. On Saturday, July 27, 1776, this evening Mr. Swinney received express from His Excellency, laying an embargo on the shipping till further orders. On Tuesday, July 30th, martial law was declared at Savannah Lamar. Early August brought strong suspicions of the French in Hispaniola. A report of two more North American privateers cruising off the West End, and it is strongly reported the Maroon Negroes are at the bottom of the Negro conspiracy. Thursday, August the 8th, 1776, many young men at Savannah Lamar have got a sort of uniform dress and call themselves the Light Infantry. Mr. Thomas Baker, it is said, is to be their captain, Charles Payne, insignia. Wednesday, September the 11th, 1776, read in the Montego Bay paper the North American Declaration of themselves an independent people. Monday, the 17th of November, 1776, a report of the Negroes at Montego Bay attempting to poison all the butcher's meat. Monday, December 9th, 1776, at the Copes, they received news from Kingston, an account of Captains Hoare, Harvey, McDaniel, and McCoy from this port, Captain James Foote, and many others of the August fleet being took by the North Americans. Amid all these concerns, however, other interests had not been entirely neglected. There had been exchanges of garden produce, seeds, and trees with others in the parish, and in September he had noted a special acquisition. Received a letter from Mr. Charles Graham dated September 8th, 1776, with a box containing double flowering myrtles. He had planted them the next day, the 12th. Then later, Sunday, September 22nd, 1776, the honeysuckle, trumpet, or woodbine in my garden is now in flower, and is perhaps the first and only one ever in this island yet. And war news apart, he had been reading. Dr. Bell lent me Emilius, or a treatise on education, translated from the French of J. Rousseau, citizen of Geneva, 3 volumes, published at Edinburgh in 1773. On the domestic front, young Jenny had visited with her new husband, Jimmy Stewart, a mulatto from the New Hope estate, and across the Cabarita. A report Mr. Cope has sold Egypt to Mr. Peter Holmes, to whom the estate was mortgaged. Jenny Young's previous husband, Mr. Limburger, had died at Egypt in late June. On the 1st of November, Egypt Titus went, and on the 13th November, Thistlewood had news that Pommel's had gone to England in mid-June and died there. This brought any further business for Thistlewood, who had accepted. This brought further business for Thistlewood, who had accepted his power of attorney. And that is the end of chapter 9, finally. As you can see, there was quite a lot that was going on. Now, the last time we were together, Bwana Hakuziki had asked whether or not the nanny that was on Thistlewood's plantation was the great queen mother of the Maroons nanny. And I said no, but I wanted to double check. And I came up with the fact that Nanny of the Maroons lived from the late 1600s to the early 1700s, and she was an adult. She probably would have been deceased by the time Thistlewood was writing this book in the mid to late 1700s, but no, that is not the same Nanny. I want you to think about how the enslaved population often lent money to Thistlewood or gave him gifts of money, and what that relationship must have been like for an enslaved person to have money to spend but not able to buy what they wanted because they could only eat the rations that were given to them by their owners. I want you to think about what that really meant. What is it like to have money, but to not be able to spend your money on what you want to spend your money on? I want you to consider what it must have been like to be treated like his personal prostitute at any given point in time, because he would have sex with these women without their consent, but he would give them a bit. So he felt like he was doing them justice or doing the right thing by them because he was paying them off for their sexual time, but he was also infecting them with the venereal diseases that he kept contracting. Excuse me. Sorry about that. All right, guys. That's all I have for you for tonight. I will be back next Tuesday. We'll be on chapter 10, which is called The Acts of God and Men. So I will see you then. I want to thank Anthony McPhail, KW97, The Forecast, Sister Ra, and the elders listening. I know that Bawana Hagaziki is listening. Koku from the Bitter Medicine Podcast is listening. And all of my new listeners, I welcome you and thank you for being here. I know MG2 is listening as well. So I will talk to you on Tuesday evening at 9 p.m. Thanks so much for being here. Peace, guys. Thank you, Sister Ra and the elders, for your gift. I received it. Thank you so much.